The knee. Erica, did you want to jump on and ask a question at all? Was it you or Steph that had asked?
It wasn't me that asked the question, but certainly because I've had, 5 knee surgeries and
Mm.
lots of knee challenges. When I touch my knee, I still get emotions that come up. Like I'll just start kind of crying and like images come and that sort of thing. So there's emotional trauma. And then there's also kind of the fascial tissue from the scar tissue from the, like the plate and the screws and stuff like that put in. But I guess in the traumatic event, right? In like the fascial tissue that's kind of over that, right? How do you, I don't know, massage it or loosen it out or stretch it or what's kind of the piece where then the fluid kind of starts going through there where it doesn't all get jammed up? Because I still feel like after all these years and working with lots of people, it still gets jammed up. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm looking for the one key kind of unlocks it all.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry to hear about your knees. But the good news is that you can have more stability in your knees. And there are a few things you brought up which are very important. And one is trauma. And so the question for a lot of people is, why do we have all this dense fascia? Well, I think part of it is evolutionary. We're still dealing with eons of traumatic events just from being humans. And it's being stored in our bodies in this tissue primarily. And so we have generational stuff coming through the bloodline, and culturally, we're sitting at a desk and from a young age, there's certain cultural things which are in place which are causing that, and then each person has their own personal experience as well. And the fascial tissue seems to be housing this trauma for whatever reason and in whatever way, and it shows up whether a person's aware of it or not. Sometimes I'll be working with a person, have you had any injuries? No, been fine. And then we're working on a certain area of the body. We hit some area where there's like a ton of force. I'm like, whoa, what's going on in here? There's some scar tissue. And then as we start working on that area, they're like, oh, I was jumping over a fence as a kid and cut myself on the barbed wire, or, certain things will start to come up in their memory. And so then there's a disassociation or depersonalization that the person's had with that part of themselves. And what happens is, as we start to go into the body and change that, the event comes, it surfaces, but it's very non-invasive because I can only stretch the person to the degree that they're participating with me. And so I'm not doing it to them. In fact, actually, they have to become skilled at getting stretched. So it's very different than massage, where the person just relies on the massage therapist to figure it out. It's like, no, no, no. If they don't know how to breathe properly, if they don't know how to generate tension, if they don't know how to resist, if they don't know how to analyze what's going on, if they don't know how to make the movement and position themselves, we're not getting a result. So my job is actually not to just figure out where it's at, but to actually give them the tools to figure out how to change that. Now, when most people are trying to change dense tissue, they're usually doing it from outside in. And so through massage, for example, if the massage therapist is feeling, they're finding an area where there's dense tissue, and then they're using their force externally through their hands to go into your body to break up the adhesions from the outside in. And that works to relieve tenseness in the muscle, but I haven't seen that change fascial tissue. And a couple friends of mine, Nick and Bob, worked with the leading authority of fascial changes in terms of surgery, who's the one that identified what it looks like under high magnification. And he uses a special scalpel to cut out dense fascia and remove it from the body. It's that tough. So massage doesn't really break up tissue that's that tough. And besides that, even if it could, a lot of this dense tissue is deep down, like talking like bone level. And so it would just tear you up to try to get in there with your fingers. It'd be way too painful. So there's got to be another way to apply force to that tissue that doesn't require surgery and doesn't require pushing through the muscular tissue. And that, I haven't found another way to do it other than utilizing what we just went through, which is to resist and then to use that force internally to match the force that is already being exerted internally. And then we saw it on an endoscope. It started to break apart and then be removed from the body. And so in terms of your knees, every joint in the body is controlled, so to speak, by one of the major muscle groups. And so for the knees in particular, there's an association with the central hamstrings, the semitendinosus. and also into your piriformis, into your glutes. Those muscles would need to be targeted, and we would have to identify which vector, and probably in the flexion extension vector, but primarily we'd have to do some adduction, abduction to get you stable in your hip girdle. We do a lot of these types of movements to get you stable in your hip girdle. Then we'd start doing some flexion extension movements to get into your glute and into your hamstring. And as we started to identify where in your hamstring it's really tight, we wouldn't even need to touch your knee. Your knee can just be initially kind of passive. And then we're just kind of grabbing your thigh from above your knee. You're kicking into someone's thigh, and they're lifting your thigh up towards your chest. You kick down, they lift your thigh up towards your chest. You kick down again and again and again. And that's getting from like above your knee to your hamstring, to your glute, to your low back. You start to work on that pelvic region, get the abductors, adductors stable, get the flexors and extensors flexible. Your femur will start to unlock in terms of the twist. And so what that means is you're not just decompressing your knee so that the tendons and the ligaments aren't under so much stress. That's important. But more importantly is that you're changing the rotational hold that has been on your knee. Otherwise, you can repair the tendons, you can repair the ligaments, but the forces that cause those ligaments and tendons to be compromised initially are going to show up again. And then if you get the whole joint replaced, you have a really strong joint, then all those forces, they're not going to be able to destroy the new joint, so they'll go to the next joint. You'll start to have an ankle problem, or you start to have a hip joint problem. And so that's why you see people who have consecutive surgeries. By the time they're 85, the surgeons can't replace any more of their joints because the initial forces were never dealt with. And so that can all change. And so what happens is, as you keep doing those repetitions, it's not like muscle building. It's not like weight training where, your body builds this muscle, and then if your body uses it and needs it, it keeps it around. But if it doesn't need it, it's like, I'm not feeding that muscle, get rid of that, and then you lose all your strength, right? It's not like that when you change the fascial tissue and the scar tissue. It's more of a permanent change, which is really hard for people to understand and believe. But that's how it works. When you match the force that's caused the destruction in your knee, and you exceed the tensile strength of the dense fascia and scar tissue, that force does not come back. And the reason it doesn't come back is because, for one, the body has literally remodeled that area and has removed the dense tissue. But also is that during the process, a person learns what it is that got them into that problem to begin with. And it might be something emotional, it might be something psychological. Oh my God, I've been trying to, trust people by giving them authority, and this whole time I've been missing out on my own authority. Or whatever it is psychologically, emotionally shows up. You're learning as you remove the trauma what it is that was missing. Not so much that what you did wrong. It's more like, oh, I didn't have this certain behavior developed in me. And so I was literally weak at my knees all day long, every day. And so my tendons and ligaments were holding on for dear life. And so the changes that happen physically are permanent, and then the behavioral changes sustain the way of being that's associated with a more higher vibration or a more healthier way to function. So that can all change. And I know it's scary when you're working on an area that's injured because it's not so stable. So you just work on the areas that are able to be moved, and you'll see that ultimately your knee will become more stable, and then the rotations of your femur and your lower leg will start to change as well, decompressing your knee. So even if you've lost cartilage or lost whatever, you don't have to lose any more. And then as long as you don't want to go climbing downhill skiing or something, you should probably be fine. You know what I mean? And even if you want to go downhill skiing, you might be fine. You just have to make sure that you can handle all the different vectors.